Welcome to the first ever episode in web development with Ruby on Rails. We're going to maybe using other frameworks in the future, but for this one, we're going to get started. And if you don't know how to set up your Mac to get this up and running, feel free to look at the card that's appearing at the top right around about now to get started from zero to hero, from a new Mac or an old Mac to getting us ready for web development. However, this episode is going to be about starting your first application. So we're going to need a first idea of an application to go with. And for this episode, I decided just to go with a to-do app. It's very simple. And easy to get started, or at least it's simple-ish, and let's just create it. So if I type Rails-V, you'll see that I'm on Rails 6141. Hopefully you're on the same if you're at the date of release of this video, but it might be a new version later. So I'm going to type Rails new and then to do. That's going to be the name of our application. And in my case, I'm going to specify _database equals PostgreSQL. You may not need to do that. You can just use without that if you want a SQLite database. But if you want to deploy this live somewhere, you want probably either PostgreSQL or MySQL there and stuff like that. So yeah, Rails new to do, and that's going to generate in the background. Now while it's doing its thing, generating lots of files, I'm going to go through and talk a little bit about what these episodes are going to be. I want to implement a feature, first of all, each episode so that you can get up and running and get it ready on the screen. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about user interface and user experience and maybe making it look nice and other stuff like that as we go forward through the episodes. But in general, each episode, the feature bit's going to come first. So if you want to skip the rest about the niceties, then you can. However, this is also about at least these first episodes, are about the basics of Rails as well. So I'm going to be explaining along the way how things work so that you can understand that not just a particular feature as we go along. And I'll be using examples about a feature to demonstrate different aspects of Ruby on Rails. So that's all done now. And if I just then open this, so if I go into CD to do, and if I go into my code editor, which in this case is VS Code, you'll see a whole bunch of green things on the left-hand side here. So this is a file explorer. Anything that's green is not yet checked into Git version control. And Git was what we're going to be using anyway as we go through, so we may as well do that. But before we just do, one final thing here is I just want to create the database. So Rails DB create. That's going to go and create the to-do development and to-do test database. Don't worry about the test one. We'll come back to that in another episode. The development one's the one that everything's going to be included in that you actually add to your application. So from there, what we need to do is check it into Git. If you're following along, you'll be able to type GST and get Git status. If not, just type Git status and do it longhand. But this is OMZSH, so we have lots of shortcuts and aliases, etc. that I can type in here. I just get used to them, and it's much, much faster than actually typing out the full line. Anyway, lots of untracked files, and it says no commits yet there. So what we're going to do is basically add everything. So git add dot, and then we're going to type git commit, and then give it a message, -m, and the message saying initial commit. It's just naming this save point, if you want to think of it like that. There it goes. And if I type GST again, nothing to commit, working need to read clean. And if I go into my code editor, everything is white over here. So no changed files whatsoever. We have a bare bones Rails application ready. And we can just double check that by opening a new tab into the same directory. I've got that set up in item2 preferences if you want to make sure that happens. When you open a new tab, it stays in the same place, etc. Type Rails space S or server. Doesn't matter which one you type. And if I go into my web browser and type localhost 3000 and press enter, yeah, you're on Rails. So this is the home page of Rails by default. It shows up here in the log of the web server tab that you basically are accessing the home page, get / which means the home page, and then it's being handled by something called Rails welcome controller and then #index. We'll come on to what that means in the context of our code in a little bit, but basically that's not our code. It's somewhere in this long URL that is nothing to do with us really as far as that's concerned, not our code. So let's change that then. Let's actually add our first feature to this application, the to-do list itself. Now, the list is just a web page. It's a list of things, and we need some way of storing that in the database. So I'm going to type in a line and then explain what it is. So Rails generate for G, scaffold. This is a kind of a newbie way of getting lots of files by default. later we'll skip some of the steps in this and make it explicit. We'll do lots of separate steps like Rails generate model and Rails generate controller. Right now, I'm just going to get a scaffold up and running so that we get this running as soon as possible. Rails scaffold, and then I'm going to call it a task. Okay, you could call it item, you could call it thing, you could call it all kinds of things, but I want to be quite explicit about what these things are. So I'm going to call it task for now, and then I need a list of sort of columns we're going to store in a database, fields, if you like, in the form, things about a task. So a title, a description, and by default, the types that it stores in the database is going to be string. So if I can explicitly say the description should be a string here, but because that happens by default, I don't need to type that. If I want it not to be a string, then I actually have to change that. So in this case, I want description to be text, okay, not string. Basically, text just stores more characters in the database. And then I also want a few more fields. What do we want to? What makes sense as far as tracking a task? Well, we could think about whether it's done, and we could say a field called done, and we could use Boolean to say true or false. Is it done or is it not done? Well, the problem is that some tasks might be partially done. So we can't really use one Boolean. You could then add two, like partially done, but it gets a bit tricky then. So what we think about it when we have more than two values, we want to have some kind of other way of representing that in the database. And in this case, we're just going to use an integer, a 0, 1, 2, etc. So I'm going to call it state, and I'm going to say it's an integer. So our default state will be 0, and then the next state along will be 1, and the next state along will be 2. But we're not going to use numbers in our code to check that. We'll come to a much friendlier way of doing that called enums in a little bit. Then we want a couple of other things. So I want maybe a deadlines, so due at, and a date time. That might be a bit specific to allow times in a deadline. That might be a bit micromanagery, but at least we'll have the ability to do that if it's in the database. And we can modify whether you can specify time in the HTML, the view sort of area. So just remove the extra columns, etc. We don't need the extra drop downs. We don't need the time. And then maybe I also want soft deletion. Now, soft deletion is whereby if I click on destroy a task, it doesn't just get wiped from the database. It actually stays there, but then we just don't show it in future. And then if people want to restore those, if they make a mistake, you can present a different area of your application where they can go back and say, oh, actually undelete that, or unarchive it, or whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to call it deleted at, and also use that date timing for that. Now you might think that this also could just be a Boolean. Okay, it could just be, is it deleted or is it not deleted? However, I might want to say for both this and the due at column, I want to know if something was deleted recently. And without any extra columns, I could actually add deleted Boolean, and then I could have a separate deleted at column with a date time. So I know when it was actually deleted and then query on that. But I can get both features, both functionality from a single column called deleted at. Because by default, it's going to be stored in the database as null. There's going to be no value there. If there is something that has a null value in deleted at, it's not deleted. So we can use that to actually represent that in the database and in our code. So deleted at, due at, state, i.e. where it's at, and then title and description. Seems reasonable for those, so let's just actually generate the scaffold. That's going to go through and create a bunch more files. Most of them you can completely ignore. There's only a few that we're going to be dealing with in this episode, and then we're going to be dealing with other stuff like tasks a little bit later. So here's all the files. Again, ignore most of them. You don't need them for now. At least not need to look at them. The main one we're going to look at is this create tasks migration file. We're going to look at task, we're going to look at task controller, and then the views. So let's explain what each of those are. Let's start with the migration file. Migration file is, let me just open, is my code editor open? Yes, it is. Good. So let's just open that. I can hit Command P or Command T because I've remapped mine, but open quick open file or whatever it's called. That's fine. So migrate and it'll find it. So in here are what I actually asked for in that line about the scaffold. I asked for a string column called title, a text column called description, etc, etc, etc. The only change I want to make here is to change state to have a default value of 0. It's initial state. We want to set that up whenever we create tasks. Other than that, that file is fine, and then we can actually migrate the database. So Rails DB migrate. Okay, and that will basically update the database. And is the server still running? It is. So if we then go to the web browser, if we do /tasks, it's migrations are pending. Did I not just apply those? Rails did we migrate? Ah, yes, it is going through now. That's fine. Weird. Anyway, moving on. Yes, so tasks. Here is my whole list of things to do. So if I then create a new task, yeah, there's a problem with this form. This is the thing with scaffolds. It generates forms that are accurate to what you ask for, but it is a little, well, let's just say, overly verbose in this case. I don't want these columns like this, although I certainly don't want deleted at to be ever exposed to the user, so we just need to modify a couple of things. Easy enough done. Let's look at the views. So we've looked at the migration file. Now let's look at the views, the thing that's on the screen. So in the views, we're going to look into app, views. So open it up, app, open up views, into tasks, and there's a bunch of files. The one we're looking for is handily named _form. An _form is used inside the new form thing and the edit form thing. So if you go back to an existing record and want to change stuff, you'll get the same form as you would as if you're creating a new one. Because they both, if you have a look in here, it says render form in here. It says, hey, I'm just going to use the contents of this file. So in here, you'll see there's a whole bunch of different HTML stuff. In our case, we're going to just remove deleted at. We don't need that. And in fact, for now, I think I'm probably just going to comment out like this, the date time for due at stuff. I'm not concerned with due at too much in this episode. We can implement that in the future. However, I do want to have title, description, and state. And state's going to look really ugly right now. But don't worry, we will change that in a little bit. So back to our web browser, refresh, and yes, now we can create something. In fact, let me just comment that out. Let me just make that really simple for us. And I'm also going to make the form, just modify the form a little bit. It's a text area, so I can specify the columns and the rows. So cols I'll specify as 80, and rows I will specify as I don't know, 20. And then in the title, I'm going to specify its size as, say, 40 or something like that. Again, refresh the page, and now we get something a bit more akin to an actual form. So I'm going to create a couple of things. So first task, and then create task. Good. And then press back and create a new task. Second, and I'm not going to bother with a description. And I'm going to create a third task, third. All right, 3 tasks, all well and good, and everything works in our application. Now, are we done? Well, to get the feature initially created at, perhaps, but I'm not happy that this shows a deleted at column here as well, and other bits and pieces. So why don't we just modify this to look a little bit more appropriate? First of all, I don't need show, edit, and destroy buttons next to everything. I perhaps don't even want destroy to be able to be accessed from this page. I'm just looking at a list of tasks after all. So let's go and look at that particular view. So this is the form. We're not looking at the form anymore. Let's look at the index page. This is the one we're looking at when it's showing us basically all of the list. This is our to-do list. So first of all, I don't want a show button. What I actually want is the first thing to be a link to show, and then I'm just going to delete that and then just refresh. But now it says show for everything. Well, that's no good. So instead, I'm just going to change basically the show name here, delete that, and then type in task.title. And then now we should have the title being a link to the show page. And the show page is just the page where you show all the details about the task. When we style, this is going to be nice and looking in the middle of the screen and maybe showing other things like comments in the future and stuff like that. But for now, it's just a link. And description, I don't want that as a separate column. That's just... That's my technical description. So all I'm going to do is collapse that into the original column. I'm just going to basically put a break in here and then just put that like that and just indent everything a little bit so that everything looks a little bit nice. In fact, let's just put that break on the end of the last line. There we go. So a link and a description in the same column. But I then need to basically remove the header as well, otherwise everything will look wrong. And then I, again, am not going to want the duat column for now. We can add it back later. And I definitely don't want the deleted at column, so we're going to take that out as well. Okay, deleted at. Okay, and this column span now is down to 2. And there we go. So it's very, very short indeed. Title with a description underneath if its description is provided, and then a state column. The state's very ugly. We're going to fix that now, or at least shortly. First of all, I actually just want to comment out the destroy, and I think I'll comment out the edit as well. Okay. Yeah, so there's always a link on the show page to go to edit, so I can always do it that way. And destroy will come back to as far as that's concerned about deleting it. It's probably going to go on to the edit page as well. So edit in here, I suppose, something like that, or the show page. It'll be a link somewhere. So for now, we've just got a list of tasks and it's state. Let's talk about state. So let's just get that neatly formatted. So let's look at the next thing in the files that have been created, the task. Okay, this is a file called a model. Task.rb. And let me just open the controller and the views as well. So we've just got everything alongside each other, so just so I can explain MVC a little bit. So, and then the roots file. Okay, so when you request a URL in your web browser, like /tasks, it's going to go to your controller. It's going to do that because in your roots file, or your routes file if you're American, it has a line that says resources tasks. So that generates a whole bunch of URLs that are available for people to actually request from your application. So if I type Rails roots, it's going to show me all the URLs that your application will respond to. And there's a whole bunch of different stuff, okay? But let's just actually shorten that a little bit and append this by typing a pipe character. That's basically next to your enter key and shift backslash on a Mac keyboard. And then type grep task. So basically filter this to anything that just mentions the word task. Much shorter list. Much easier for us to actually deal with. So on the right hand side, look here. First, there is a controller, which is this first word, then a hash, and then the action, which is this second word. What it means is anyone who goes to this URL right here will get sent to this part of your code. So in this case, get, which just means a regular web browser, web page get. Post is when you submit form details. We'll come back to that later. And don't worry about patch, push, and put and delete for now. So if we get the /tasks URL, don't worry about the format bit. Go to tasks index. So go to tasks index. We then go to tasks controller, which is that first bit, the first bit in that root, and then go to index. And it means go here. This is then going to go and retrieve a whole bunch of stuff from our model, which is our database essentially, task.all. So it's going to go in here. It's blank by default because you get a whole bunch of stuff for free. And the all method is basically saying everything from the database. That turns into a database query that says, get everything from the tasks table and give me them, please. And then it adds them into an instance variable. The instance variable is then available in your views. So if we go into the index that we've just been editing, you'll see there's the instance variable. And then there is a built-in method that says .each. That means this is going to create a loop. And then inside the loop, we need some way of referring to each one. So each one, it has a name called task. It's a local variable. And inside the loop, we can then say, we can use that task to refer to like the title of just this one task. Okay. And it's going to loop over those for every single task you have in your database for this particular case. So the model contains everything about the data that's held in the database, really, and its relationship to other models. So for example, if you have comments assigned to a task, you might have them a reference to them in this file. We'll come back to that later. Task controller is really dealing with going and interacting with the user. It's going fetching the stuff from the database. It's going to present the correct view to the user. And you'll see by default, the scaffold shows you above each action which URL it is happening. And it has JSON built in. Ignore the JSON things for now. We're not going to cover those in this episode. Basically, as we're asking for HTML here, and you can see If we want to have a new task, we can just type /tasks/new in the web browser and it'll come here because of all the stuff in the routes file. We're going to make one major change in the routes file, and that's going to specify the home page to be the same place that we've been looking at. So root 2, and then we're going to type in quote marks and then tasks, then hash index. Okay, and now if I go to the web browser and just do that, we get the same thing. So this is our home page now. It's our list of tasks. Cool. So now what I want to do is do two things before we get to the end. And that is, first thing is going to be about changing this state thing to be less ugly, okay? So we need an enum for that. So let me just go and add that to our task model. To do that, it's pretty simple. If I just type in here enum, and then the name that we created it at in the database, state in our case, and then create curly braces, I can then basically create a friendly name for each value that we have in this state. So for example, I can say, I don't know, initial, I'll probably rename this later, but initial is fine for now. Started as 1, and then finished or done as 2, all right? And that's it. If I then go back to my web browser and press refresh, you'll see it says state initial. So if I then go into, let's say, second, you'll see in the edit form, we don't currently have that state dropdown. Remember, we removed it. So if I go back to the form, and if I then go and allow this to be state, I'm not sure if that will actually work by default without some more changes. Let's just give it a go. Yeah, it doesn't. It thinks it's supposed to be a number field, and it's not supposed to be a number field. It now needs to be a drop down. So here's the modification. I can change that to be, instead of number field, I can change it to be a select, which means a drop down. And we call that obviously the same name. But now we need to, because it's a drop down, we don't want just to drop down. It's not automatic what the values are in that drop down. So instead, we need to go and ask the task model to give us all the states. And then we want the keys for those states, i.e. the friendly names, and then give us it in an array. So we can just chain the methods along like this. And if I do that, we get this form. So we have initial, started. So if I just change that to started and update the task, and go to back, you'll see now I have state started. Still not very friendly as far as how it looks, but we'll get to that as well. Again, date, time, select, I don't need to worry about still. So I'll just close that form off. And what's the next thing I want to look at? I think soft delete is the next thing I want to look at. So I'm going to go into the edit file, and I'm also going to go into index. And I want to just copy and paste this particular line right here, because we're going to just use that in the edit thing. We're going to say show back, and I think that we can just put in an extra line and unlike this. So I can say, in fact, this is the wrong file. I actually don't want it in edit. After all, I want it in show. Okay, this is going to show all the details. And then I got a link to edit down at the bottom. And I've got a link to destroy, and then probably I just want to put a break in there and put back. So if I go and click on any of them now, for example, third, I can then say, oh, it's going to, okay, yeah, so I'm referring to something in the task. I need to just say that to be the instance variable task. There we go. So edit and destroy. So if I go into and click to destroy right now, are you sure it's going to pop up? And then it's gone. It's gone completely from the database. It's not there anymore. And if I want to undo that later, that's going to be a problem because it isn't there anymore. So we need to implement, or at least I want to implement soft delete so I can go back later. All right, so how do we do that? Well, we have this deleted at column, which is a date time, and it's pretty useless as it is. We need some way of thinking about that inside the application. So let's look back for a moment at our task controller and down to destroy. This, by default, is going to just destroy the task, as we've said. We're going to change that. So what we're going to do to change it is say deleted at. Instead of destroying it, we're just going to set the deleted at field to time.now, i.e. literally our current date time down to the microsecond or whatever it stores as. Doesn't much matter. And then we're going to want to try and save the record. Now, right now, it isn't doing that because it's expecting us to just basically, it's gone. And then we just redirect ignore what this respond to thing is, ignore the format.json line, just look at the format.html. Basically, redirect the user back to the tasks URL. Now, the tasks URL is in the roots. You see here it says tasks. These can be appended with _URL or _path, depending where you are, and they'll take you back to this, which is our list of tasks. So it basically says, go back to the list of tasks and give a notice that the task was successfully destroyed. And if we go into the index file, at the top, you'll see there is a notice output here. By default, it's false, but that's the green message or red message potentially that you get at the top of the screen telling you what you've done. You don't have to have it there, but it's nice and friendly for the user to know what they've just done, just in case. Instead, however, what we're able to do is just, let's look up here. You see respond to do format, and then if task saves, do something else. All right, so what we're going to do is just take that bit inside the respond to do format, and we're going to paste it down here. Okay. In fact, no, I'm not going to paste it down here. I just want to take the whole thing, the whole respond to. I'm just going to modify it a little bit because we don't need a lot of the stuff. So ignore this existing block down here and paste in this. And then we're going to just do remove the else stuff, because if it doesn't work, then, well, there's no should be no reason it ever doesn't work, put it that way. And then we'll just make sure we'll just say soft deleted, well, archived, shall we say. Task was successfully archived. And then let's get rid of this original block. Okay. Right, so we're setting the deleted at to me now, and then we're going to basically ignore the respond to. If task.saves, it's going to try saving it. And if it's successful, it's going to actually redirect us back to the actual task. We don't want the task in this case. We want the task's URL. All right, task was successfully archived. Now, if I go back to the index form, and let's go to our second one. So go to second, and we press destroy. It's going to say, are you sure? And it takes us back and says, task was successfully archived, but it's still there. It's still there because although we've set something in the database, what we haven't done is modified our view and our controller to basically output only the things that are not deleted. Right now, if we look at our controller at the very top, we're basically getting all tasks and outputting it. And that's what's looping through in the index. Now, we could just try and do some other things in there. What we need to actually do and discuss now is scopes. So let's look at the task thing. Scopes, as it might sound, are ways of changing the data that you get so that certain things are included or certain things aren't included. There's two different ways of doing that. One is default scope. Okay, default scope. And we are basically going to apply that to everything if you use this. And the syntax has changed in recent versions. So let me just see if I remember this off the top of my head, where let's just say deleted at is null. Okay. Let's see if that actually works, and I've remembered. Yes, it does work. Okay. So to explain this, when we ask for all in the controller, the default scope always applies if you specify one. So it's basically saying, get me, or basically append to all of the things I ever asked for, this bit, this where deleted at is null. So if I wanted to, I could just go in here and type this same thing, where deleted at is null. But it's a bit of a pain having to type that every single time. So instead, we can apply that as a scope in here. Works fine. There are some gotchas, however, with default scope. You have to remember that every time you ask for this, the default scope will apply, if I remember rightly. So if I went here and said, task dot where deleted at is null, yeah, that's fine. But if I want to do a not null, it comes up with nothing. That's weird because we've set the date right. We've set the date in there. So not null means there's an entry in the database. So it should appear. The problem is, again, the default scope always applies. So you're literally saying, go and fetch me the things that are null, and then of those, the things that are not null. So it just brings back nothing. Okay, so that's important. So instead, you can leave it as task.all with that gotcha in place. The other way of doing things is to add a scope. a named scope. So for example, we could have deleted. Okay, and this has a slightly different syntax, but it's pretty much the same other than the starting bit, where deleted at is not null. So we've now explicitly got something called deleted. And if I then type in here deleted, I'm not getting anything because the default scope is still there. So if we just comment that out, now I can see all the deleted items. So again, continue to be aware of default scope. The other way of doing it, if you want to leave default scope out, is to create two named scopes. So instead, I could say not deleted, I suppose. Here, not deleted. And then you'd have to say here, like, not deleted. So, yes, we have to be a little bit careful. Oh, I have to change it here. Is null. Okay, so not deleted is null. So there we go. However, that again is going back to being a burden here. Instead, you might call them active. Okay. And again, we'd have to call them active here. And away we go. Okay, same thing applies. However, for now, I'm going to use default scope. Just remember that it exists. And we have to, if you do have it existing like this, then of course it's going to work. But if you want to get to deleted, then you can't just do deleted, as I've said before, because nothing will come back. You first have to say unscoped.deleted. And that should give us the things we want. We have to unset the default scope. All right, other than that. And other than that, we can just use little handy terms like this, handy little, basically, scopes to get whatever we want. We can have lots of these things. Like, for example, we could have one that said, I don't know, due today, okay? And then we'd figure out what we needed to write in here for things that are due today. For example, it would be something like due at is less than or greater than. I don't remember the syntax for this thing. I'll come back to it later, but then say, I don't know, time.now, I don't know, -1.day or something like that. That's wrong, but I need to go and actually do that later. But we can have these so that we have these handy little things we can refer to in our controller. And just say, for example, if we have a separate controller, just to show today's stuff that's due in our index, instead of just writing this kind of stuff, we can just literally write something that we've named. For example, task.due today. And then we don't have to worry about any complex code in here because we've written it all in the task layer. So that's soft deletion, and that will actually work once I've restored everything back to where it should be. So task.all, and everything works as it should. All right, so now we've got a to-do list app. We've got the ability to create, edit and delete stuff. We've got, for example, we're in here and create edit. We can just type in first long description of something that should probably, be lorem ipsum'd. And we can just update the task. And back. And I think I don't even want to go to the show view here, actually. So when we go to the controller, if we have a look in here, when I create something, it says go to the task and say task was successfully created. I think I just want to go back to the tasks URL, to be honest. Tasks URL. Or I think, can I just go back to tasks? Do I need to actually specify URL there? Let's just go and edit. Oh, in fact, this is just for create. So new test. Test create. Yeah, it's going to need a tasks URL. Okay. And if I resubmit the form, yeah, it comes back here. So task was successfully created. And if I just do that again, it should just come test, and then create task, and it'll just go straight back to the top. Yeah, I don't want to really see that show page too much unless I actually explicitly click on stuff. So that's all cool. Now what I want to do is just change this state column. It's very ugly. I'm not going to want to see state initial like that. I'm going to want to see perhaps some kind of icon representation of that. Now we're going to be implementing in probably the next episode, Tailwind. Now if we go to tailwindcss.com, I think it is. Yep, here we are. You'll see if I press Command K on here, there's a shortcut. It lets us basically look for anything. So I'm just going to look for SVGs. There is, I think, like an external, let's just see, documentation. There's like external sort of stuff in here for sort of quick icons that you can actually get together. Let me see if I can find it. Interactivity, no. SVG, maybe? Ah, no, it's over here on resources at the very top, and then there is icons, hero icons. So MIT license high quality SVG, and this is really kind of nice. So if I look at, for example, let's just do a command F and then check mark. So we have a badge check, and then we can just continue pressing enter, check circle, check. Let me just actually just use this for now. So I can just copy SVG. There's no images to actually license or anything. It obviously MIT license, you can do anything you like. But if we go into the index and then where it says task state, we can actually just change this now. So we can modify this a little bit. We'll probably move this into its own file later, because it'll be like, we'll need to probably add drop downs for this to be able to change things by clicking on the icons rather than just the names. But for now, it'll do. We just want to have something nice and neat. So we can say, instead of task.state, we can say, and just remove the equal sign, meaning we're not outputting anything here. We're actually just having a loop, or well, actually not loop in this case. We're actually going to use an if check. We're going to say if task.state. Can we just refer to that by its enum? I think we might be able to. .initial. Will it let us have that? It may not do. If not, we'll quickly fix it. And then we're just going to paste in the SVG. Okay. And I'm just going to indent that. So will you let me do it? I didn't think it would. I was hoping it would be really nice and automatic. So let's just say if the state is equal to initial or something like that. I'll refer to that later. Will that actually work? No. How about just initial as a symbol? No, you won't work either. Let me do this properly. Whoops, I just forgot to remove the .initial from this side. And yeah, we can just say, is it actually initial? Then we can just look at the tasks, and you'll see there we have an icon. It still is looking odd. We'll do that. We'll deal with that when we come on to Tailwind in the next episode. However, for now, we can just then say that. We can do an else if, or we can just do ifs in this case. So we can just do if, and then again, this is probably why we're going to move this off into a separate file. What's the names I gave them? So started, and then done. Okay, and then let's just look for a couple of other options on hero icons. So started, well, who knows? Maybe a clipboard or something like that. Just for the moment, clipboard, check, maybe. Clipboard. Let's just do that, and let's paste that in, and indent. And then for done, for initial, what do I want for initial? Maybe just a circle or something like that. Doesn't much matter. Circle dots, circle exclamation. Just like a circle, please. That would be nice. No. There should be something along those lines, I would have thought. And I just added them as an inbox symbol for now. So if we go into first task and then press edit, we can change the drop down to be I've started it and update the task. And I do need to just change that one thing in the controller there. So we did the same thing on create. We're going to do the same thing on update here. So it goes to the tasks URL and not back to the task, just tasks URL, task was successfully updated, etc. And then we just go back. So now you see there is one, it's got a clipboard. So that's the one I've currently got it started as. And then I can just go edit this one, maybe then say edit and then say this one has been done. And oh, whoops, I forgot to actually complete that done and then update task. So now I've got 3 different states and they're represented as icons. And then what we'll probably do, obviously, when we get into the styling of this is just move this into the middle of the screen and space this out nicely and format it and stuff like that. So everything will look pretty good. But right now we've got a working application. We've got the ability to create tasks, edit them, update them. We can soft delete them. We can basically change a lot of stuff like that. And we have this nice friendly way of just basically getting access to just the ones we want. So for example, I could just request the ones that are in the initial state, or the ones that are started, or the ones that are done, and do stuff like that. For now, I think that's it for this episode. Next episode, as I said, we're going to come on to styling. Hopefully you've enjoyed this. If you have, do put some comments down below with any questions you might have, and we'll cover it probably on the next episode. And I hope to see you there. Thanks a lot for watching. Feel free to subscribe down below and press the bell if you want notifications for future episodes. Otherwise, yeah, see you next time.